What if the most dangerous place you've ever lived isn't a city, a home, or a relationship, but a psychological space inside your own mind? Carl Jung believed that people don't go mad from external chaos. They lose themselves in subtle, invisible rooms they never realized they entered. These are not places you walk into. They are emotional atmospheres formed by memory, fear, silence, and shame. Like smoke in the air, they shape how you breathe, how you see, and how you love, without you ever noticing. Imagine waking up every day inside a room called guilt, where no matter what you do, it's never enough. Or a space called comparison, where your joy is always hijacked by someone else's highlight reel. Or worse, the fog of pleasing, where your voice disappears so others can stay comfortable. These rooms don't have doors or walls, but they trap you just the same. They shrink your energy. They erase your confidence. And eventually, they make you question your own reality. Jung once treated a man in 1961 who seemed perfectly fine on the outside. Stable job, kind demeanor, no visible crisis. But on the inside, he was unraveling. After months of deep work, Jung discovered the truth. This man wasn't living in the present. He was trapped in one of these unconscious spaces, a place built long ago by childhood rejection and hidden self-loathing. The real danger? Most people never realize they're trapped, and even fewer know how to leave. This journey isn't about therapy or motivation, it's about illumination. In the next sections, we'll uncover the 7 psychological spaces that silently steal your peace. And we'll begin where all healing begins, not with effort, but with awareness. The light only returns when you recognize the room you've been standing in all along. Have you ever wondered why some people cling so fiercely to beliefs that no longer serve them, even when reality offers clear evidence otherwise? It's often not because they're stubborn, but because their entire psychological ecosystem has been built to protect a fragile identity. Think about a man who watches the same political commentary every night, not for new insights, but for the comfort of repetition. Or the woman who attends weekly gatherings with friends who echo her every complaint, never once questioning her story. At first, this kind of emotional familiarity feels like safety, but over time, it becomes a prison disguised as belonging. This is the invisible danger of the echo chamber. It mimics love, but it feeds illusion. Carl Jung warned us that when we surround ourselves only with those who affirm our views, we lose the mirror of the unconscious, the vital tension between what we think we are and what we truly are. Without contradiction, there is no growth. The ego grows fat, while the soul starves. Silence becomes agreement. Dissonance becomes a threat. And so, instead of confronting our shadow, we edit reality to avoid it. In today's world, this psychological pattern is everywhere. A middle-aged man may cut off his children because they challenge his outdated worldview. A woman in her 50s might stay in a spiritual group where no one dares question the leader because questioning would mean losing the only family she knows. The fear of being wrong becomes greater than the desire to be free. But what happens when your inner voice begins to whisper doubts louder than the group's applause? Jung believed that true individuation, the journey toward the authentic self, cannot happen inside a sealed chamber. The psyche needs friction to evolve, needs to be rubbed raw by contradiction to discover its own truth. But stepping out of the echo chamber feels like betrayal. You risk losing your tribe, your comfort, even your sense of identity. Still, the deeper risk is staying. Your mind grows weaker, your emotional range narrows, and your world quietly collapses into a fragile bubble where anything unfamiliar becomes unbearable. So ask yourself, who still challenges you? Who still dares to disagree with you, not to hurt you, but to help you grow? Do you listen only to voices that comfort your pain, or also to those that confront it? What if the friction you avoid is actually the flame that could ignite your transformation? The echo chamber may feel like home, but home is not where you stay stuck. Home is where you outgrow the illusion and finally start to breathe. Have you ever accomplished something meaningful only to feel a strange hollowness because someone else seemed to do it better, faster, or with more applause? Maybe you raised 3 children through emotional storms, sacrificed sleep and dreams for their safety, yet somehow you feel behind because your classmate just bought a second home or runs a startup with 500 employees. You don't even want that life, and yet the sting lingers. Why? This is not just insecurity. It is the psychological prison Carl Jung might describe as the false self measuring against a projected ideal. In the comparison arena, your value is not experienced inwardly, but judged by the echo of someone else's highlight reel. You mistake their persona, the carefully curated mask, for their soul. You compare their outer story to your inner struggle, and it always ends the same. You feel less, not because you are less, but because comparison robs you of context, nuance, and your own emotional truth. Jung warned that the danger of identification with the collective was spiritual emptiness. In this arena, the self fragments. You chase external validation, not because you're vain, but because the unconscious belief has been planted. If I am not visibly exceptional, I am invisible. And so you scroll, you observe, you compare. You watch others announce promotions, post beach photos, and show off achievements. And inside, a quieter question grows louder. Why am I not doing more? But here is the paradox. The more you measure, the more meaning you lose. The comparison mind can never be satisfied. It is an insatiable ghost fed by images. And yet, the soul does not compare. The soul measures in depth, not distance, in authenticity, not applause. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become if you're too busy becoming someone else's version of success? So I'll ask you, whose voice are you secretly trying to impress? What scoreboard are you silently checking even when no one is watching? And most importantly, what would your life feel like if you stopped measuring it altogether and simply lived it? Let the arena crumble. That's not where your worth lives. That's where your healing begins. What happens to a soul that must rehearse its lines every day just to survive in the room? Have you ever walked into a meeting, a family gathering, or even your own home and felt like an actor on stage? Smiling on cue, nodding in agreement, pretending to be fine while your inner voice whispered something else entirely? This is the cost of emotional performance, and most people do it so often they forget it is performance at all. You laugh at jokes that hurt. You say yes when your gut is screaming no. You nod in agreement just to keep the peace, knowing your silence costs you a piece of yourself. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to adapt to society's expectations. At first it protects, but eventually it becomes a prison. In the performance theater, truth is traded for acceptance. The more you act, the more applause you receive. But the applause is never for you. It is for the mask. Over time, the boundary between your authentic self and your performative self begins to blur. You start to wonder, do they love me? Or just the version of me I've been forced to curate? Let's take a quiet but crushing example. A woman in her 40s, deeply sensitive and insightful, works in a corporate environment that values constant positivity. Every morning she puts on her high-energy face, cracks jokes, and leads meetings with charm. But inside, she's grieving a recent loss. Her child is struggling in school. Her marriage is silently collapsing, yet none of this can exist at work. Her mask must not slip, and each day her real self recedes further into the background, like an understudy who never gets called on stage. Jung warned that over-identification with the persona leads to soul loss. You become the role you play. You forget how to feel outside of it, and the body keeps score. Anxiety, exhaustion, numbness, or sudden bursts of unexplained sadness. These are not random moods. They are suppressed truths knocking from the inside. So I ask you, what part of your life feels like a stage right now? Where are you clapping for yourself when all you really want is to cry or to leave? And more importantly, who are you without the mask? It takes courage to step off the stage, but once you do, you realize something beautiful. The people who truly see you love the unscripted version of you, the raw, honest, and imperfect self that doesn't need to perform anymore. Drop the act. Your healing begins when the curtain finally falls. What happens when silence becomes a survival strategy? You wake up in the same house, eat dinner at the same table, sleep beside the same person, but it feels like no one sees you. There are no arguments, no broken plates, no loud accusations. From the outside, it all looks functional, but inside, your soul is shrinking. You're in a psychological environment where emotions are buried, needs are dismissed as dramatic, and even joy feels like something you have to tone down to keep the peace. This is the house where saying, "I'm not okay," would ruin the mood, where smiles are worn like polite masks, and everyone quietly tends to their own wounds in separate emotional corners. It's the kind of relationship or family dynamic where love is assumed but never spoken, where affection is remembered rather than shown, and where honesty feels dangerous. You become fluent in avoidance. And slowly, the price of peace is your authenticity. Carl Jung called this the danger of identification with the persona, the social mask we wear to appear fine. The longer we suppress our true needs to keep the illusion of harmony, the more the unconscious rebels. What starts as emotional numbness can evolve into chronic anxiety, self-doubt, or even physical illness. The body starts to carry the pain that the voice was never allowed to express. Can you remember a time when your tears were swallowed because it wasn't the right time? Or when you kept your truth quiet to avoid becoming the problem? These moments don't disappear. They store themselves deep in the psyche, waiting. And one day, perhaps after a silent dinner or a cold birthday morning, something inside finally whispers, "This isn't love. This is endurance." The loneliness here is subtle and insidious. You can have someone to share a bed with and still feel like you're disappearing. You can laugh at family gatherings and feel like a ghost at your own party. Jung reminds us, the soul doesn't just crave connection. It craves authentic connection. And without it, we slowly fracture. So what do we do when we live in a world that praises the mask? When we're told that being quiet is mature, that not complaining is noble? Do we continue the cycle, or do we risk being real, even if it shakes the foundation? Tell me, have you ever sat in a room full of people and felt completely alone? Have you ever noticed how some people cannot sit in silence for even 5 minutes without reaching for their phone, turning on the TV, or finding something, anything, to keep them distracted? It looks like energy, like productivity, like staying in the loop. But underneath the busyness, there is a truth many of us are afraid to face. Silence makes us uncomfortable because in silence, the unconscious begins to speak. This is the storm of chaos. The endless stream of news headlines, the constant refresh of social media, the background noise of television shows you barely watch. The way your calendar is packed with obligations that don't even matter to you. Jung would call this an escape from the self, a way of running from the contents of the shadow. For in quiet moments, the things you suppress, your grief, your anger, your unmet desires, rise to the surface. And so you keep running, filling every empty space with noise until you mistake chaos for life itself. Think about the parent who works 12-hour days, not only because bills must be paid, but because slowing down would force them to notice how disconnected they feel from their partner. Think of the man who constantly checks financial markets, sports scores, and political debates, yet has no idea how to talk to his children about their fears. Or the woman who scrolls social media until 2 in the morning, envying filtered lives while quietly drowning in her own loneliness. These storms are not random. They are self-made shelters built to keep us safe from what hurts inside. But the cost of safety is always the same. We lose touch with our own inner voice. Carl Jung observed that what we avoid does not disappear. It only grows stronger in the dark. When we refuse stillness, we also refuse the possibility of meeting ourselves honestly. The chaos storm becomes a convenient distraction, a way of convincing ourselves that life is full, when in truth it is hollow. We become like actors frantically moving on stage, hoping that if the show never stops, the emptiness behind the curtain will never be revealed. But emptiness does not vanish simply because it is ignored. It waits. The tragedy is that many realize too late. They discover that years of frantic movement led to burnout, health crises, or emotional collapse. The psyche cannot be endlessly silenced by noise. It rebels. It erupts in sudden panic attacks, in depression that no amount of busyness can cover, in relationships that crumble because no one ever paused long enough to face what was truly happening. So I ask you, what are you avoiding in the silence? What truth feels so unbearable that you drown it with television, scrolling, or work that never ends? Could it be grief you never allowed yourself to feel? Guilt you never forgave? Or the deep suspicion that you are living a life built on someone else's expectations rather than your own? Here lies the healing. Chaos may feel like motion, but real growth only happens when you dare to stop. When you sit with the silence long enough to hear the whispers of your unconscious, you begin to reclaim power from the storm. Jung taught that individuation requires facing the parts of ourselves we most resist. To end the storm is not to collapse into despair, but to invite stillness as a teacher. In silence, pain surfaces, but so does clarity. So does the chance to choose differently. The question is not whether you can survive the chaos. The question is, will you dare to step outside of it? What happens to a person when they spend years saying yes while their whole being is screaming no? At first, it seems like kindness. You tell yourself it is easier this way, that keeping the peace matters more than your discomfort. You convince yourself that sacrificing a little piece of your truth is worth it if others remain happy. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to feel like a stranger in your own skin. This is the most dangerous trap of all, because it does not look like danger. It looks like being agreeable, reliable, and responsible. People praise you for always being there, for never complaining, for carrying more than your share. Yet beneath the compliments, your soul whispers that something is deeply wrong. You have given away so many fragments of yourself that you can no longer tell where you end and others begin. Carl Jung described this as soul loss. Each time you silence your instincts, each time you override your inner truth to match what others expect, you chip away at your own center. Over time, you forget what you want, what you feel, even who you are. You become like a mirror, reflecting everyone else's desires, but showing nothing of your own. And the tragedy is that the world applauds your reflection while your authentic self fades quietly into the shadows. Think of the woman who spent 20 years in a marriage where her dreams were dismissed as impractical. She stopped painting, stopped traveling, stopped even talking about her longings because it always led to conflict. She raised children, kept a home, did everything right. And then, one day, she could not recognize herself in the mirror. Her smile looked foreign, her eyes dim. What died in her was not just creativity, but the belief that her life belonged to her. Or think of the man who worked tirelessly to provide, saying yes to every demand at the office, every overtime request, every family obligation. He told himself he was doing it for love. Yet beneath the surface, resentment festered. He no longer laughed with his children. He no longer felt joy in his work. He lived in a body that moved automatically, but his soul was exhausted. When asked what he wanted for himself, he had no answer. That is the silence of soul loss. Jung warned that the danger of the persona, the mask we wear to fit society, was that we might begin to believe it is all we are. When you abandon yourself to please others, you become trapped in that mask. It feels safe, but it is suffocating. And here is the paradox. People may love the version of you that says yes to everything, but they do not truly know you. How can they, if you have hidden yourself even from yourself? So the question becomes painfully clear. How much of your life has been shaped by what others needed, wanted, or demanded? And if you stripped away those layers, would you even recognize the person left beneath? Healing begins the moment you dare to listen again, the moment you pause long enough to ask without judgment, what do I want? What do I feel? What is mine to carry, and what must I put down? At first, the answers may come as silence because the voice of the self has been buried under years of neglect. But silence is not emptiness. It is space for the soul to return. The act of reclaiming yourself is not selfish. It is sacred. To say no when you mean no is to honor your boundaries. To rediscover what brings you joy is to invite your soul back home. Jung believed individuation was the path to wholeness, the process of becoming fully yourself. And individuation always begins with self-honesty. So I ask you now, are you living your life, or are you simply living as the version of yourself that others built for you? And if it is the latter, when will you finally open the door of that chamber and step back into your own light? What if the very parts of yourself you're most ashamed of, the ones you've hidden, denied, and tried to forget, are the same parts that hold the key to your transformation? There comes a point in every life when the mask begins to crack. You snap at someone over a small comment, and your reaction feels disproportionate. Or maybe you keep attracting the same kind of painful relationships, no matter how different the people seem at first. Or perhaps you keep sabotaging your own success at the final moment, even when everything appears to be going well. These are not accidents. These are echoes from a basement inside your psyche, a place where the rejected parts of you still live, waiting to be seen. Carl Jung called this place the shadow. It is the room within your own unconscious where you store every emotion, impulse, and memory you have deemed unacceptable. Not just your anger and jealousy, but also your grief, your fear of being unlovable, your guilt for surviving, your need to be held. We banish these feelings because we are taught they are wrong. We pretend we don't feel them. We bury them in silence. But what we refuse to face does not die. It festers. Think of the woman who always smiled in public, always helped others, always played the role of the strong one. No one knew that at night she would break down in tears. She didn't understand. She had buried her childhood resentment, her unmet needs, and her loneliness so deeply that they began leaking out as panic attacks and physical illness. Her body remembered what her mind had tried to erase. Or imagine the man who promised himself he would never be like his father, angry, unpredictable, cold. Yet every time he was hurt by someone he loved, he would shut down or lash out. He hated himself for it, but he couldn't stop. His father's shadow was alive in him, not because he wanted it there, but because he had never made peace with the pain. He tried to build a new life on top of unhealed wounds. The result? The wound became the architect. Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher in disguise. It holds the truth of your inner injuries, but also the raw material for your deepest power. When you finally open the door to that shadow basement, not to be swallowed by it, but to understand it, you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were cast away. This does not mean justifying harmful behavior or wallowing in old pain. It means daring to ask, what have I avoided feeling? What part of me am I afraid others will reject? Where does my shame really come from? And most importantly, what would happen if I offered that part of me not punishment, but compassion? When you face the shadow, something miraculous happens. The energy that was once used to repress your emotions becomes available for creation. Your anger becomes your fire to protect what matters. Your grief becomes the well of your empathy. Your fear becomes the doorway to courage. In the light of awareness, your darkness does not disappear. It transforms. And yet, this journey is not linear. The shadow will return in cycles, in new forms, in old patterns dressed as new problems. But each time you meet it with awareness, it loses its power to control you. You stop projecting your pain onto others. You stop running from the parts of yourself you were taught to hate. You become whole, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming real. So the question is not whether you have a shadow. You do. We all do. The real question is, will you dare to descend into that basement, not as a victim, but as a seeker? Will you look your oldest fears in the eye and ask them what they've been trying to teach you? The darkness is not your enemy. It is the place where your power has been waiting. Some traps are invisible because they are built inside you. But Carl Jung believed that what is unconscious can be made conscious, and what is rejected can be reclaimed. The way out is not a dramatic escape. It is a slow remembering, a return to wholeness through the sacred path of individuation. It begins the moment you realize you are not broken, just buried. Buried beneath expectations that were never yours, beneath roles that drained your essence, beneath busyness that numbed your soul. Individuation asks you to step back and observe which patterns are inherited, which environments are toxic, and which identities no longer serve you. This process is not an act of rebellion, but of reverence for the deeper self you've silenced for too long. And when you face your shadow, you don't defeat it, you integrate it. The fear you run from, the anger you suppress, and the longing you deny all contain fragments of your power. Jung taught that the shadow is not your enemy, it is your guide. It holds the energy you need to reclaim your truth, your voice, and your presence. The real strength is not in suppressing your struggles, but in carrying them with awareness. You become strong when you stop seeking approval and start seeking alignment. You become free, not by escaping the system, but by creating an inner one that no longer depends on it. You choose solitude over performance, inner clarity over outer validation. Jung's patient, who once teetered at the edge of collapse, eventually became a healer. He did not erase his suffering, he transformed it into a bridge for others. That is the power of consciousness. It turns wounds into wisdom, silence into speech, and detours into direction. You are not lost. You are invited to walk the long, quiet path back to your essence, one step at a time, one brave decision at a time, no longer waiting to be rescued, but choosing again and again to rescue yourself. And as you do, you stop asking the world for permission to be whole. You remember you always were. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.